Voila, bonsoir. Greetings everyone, hello, welcome back to the Philosophy Club. We didn't have one last week for various reasons. Life is quite intense at the moment, isn't it? On va parler en anglais et français ce soir. Nous avons un ami qui est français ici, qui habite aussi dans le village de Béthet. Ici à Béthet, il y a une grande nouvelle. Il y avait une grande dame qui est brûlée cette semaine dans un feu, par hasard. C'est très triste. À 4 heures le matin, on a les ambulances, les pompiers, tout comme ça. Et et il y a une fois, elle habite ici, dans cette maison, il y a 40 ans. D'accord, c'est triste, la vie et la mort, c'est quelque chose intégral. Et pour les philosophes comme moi, on doit comprendre la connexion entre les deux. Okay, so I'm just saying that this week in the village here at Patet, we had a tragedy. An old lady died, she was in her 80s, and just mysteriously, we don't know why, her house completely caught fire. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, I was reading, as one does, a late night book, and everything went dead, electricity was cut. So I knew there was something up, and I went outside and the ambulances and the fire engine was going. So I went along and saw this whole house on fire with water being pumped in. So I'm just saying that here in this little tiny sleepy village of France, we had a tragedy. It made me think about the people in Gaza, because that's just one person died in one house. They've had 60% of their entire houses of 2.2 million people destroyed in the last month with bombs and fires. And, you know, like, it's incalculable to think, if you're living in that place, Gaza, the horrors of it. And people are dying in the bombing raids, and they're being buried in the rubble. The hospital where a lot of them were being treated, Al-Shifa, has now been closed by force by the Israeli army, and they were just told to leave the hospital. I mean, this is, to me, a scandal in historical terms, against all international law and war crimes and stuff. So I'm really just... and my way of fighting back is with the sword of philosophy. Buddhists call it the prajna paramita. It's the sword of intellect that fights back against ignorance. It's ignorance and fear on both sides. The Israelis are terribly sad about their losses. They were killed, over 1,000 people. Some of it may have been done by friendly fire, it now turns out, if you can call it friendly fire, because these Apache helicopters went into action to get the terrorists who captured people and killed some of their own. So there are still mysteries about what happened on the 7th of October. But nevertheless, it's a tragedy. I'm not sure Netanyahu has dealt with it correctly. He's gone into full onslaught mode, and he's breaking international law. He's you know, if it had been me, Prime Minister of Israel, I wouldn't have done that. I would have gone legally. I would have said, these people are war criminals. We want them to be arrested by the UN International Criminal Court and tried. I would have done it through law. You know, but then, hey, Einstein refused to be Prime Minister of Israel. He said, no, it's going to cause trouble. We intellectuals don't really like the aggressive policies of aggressive Zionism. It could have all been done differently with the understanding of the locals, the Palestinians. That's what Martin Buber wanted. And the first generation of Zionists, I've just coined a new word, a Zionist. That's a scientific Zionist. I think I'm one of those. We would have done it with peace and love and blending in with the local people's needs and so on. That's what Martin Buber wanted. And alors, en français, c'est très compliqué, mais j'ai expliqué le désastre cette semaine et j'ai expliqué par analogie les problèmes du Gaza. C'est comme un numéro incalculable des maisons qui est détruites et des gens qui sont tués. Et pourquoi est-ce que ça arrive? Pour moi, comme un historien, je l'ai vu dans le temps du longue durée, comme les historiens français ont parlé. Marc Bloch et les autres, on parle du longue durée. Et on ne voit pas la vérité seulement dans une flash. C'est nécessaire de comprendre le contexte entier, historiquement. Et le contexte entier, c'est une séquence de désastres. La guerre première mondiale, c'était complètement stupide, à mon avis. Et la guerre deuxième mondiale, c'était même plus stupide. Et ça, c'est pourquoi il n'y a rien maintenant qui reste, sauf que consulter les dieux. Et on doit demander aux dieux pourquoi est-ce que ça arrive. Pourquoi les enfants et les femmes de Gaza doivent être sacrifiés. C'est quoi? C'est un barbarisme. Et je suis avec Sartre, Camus et les autres philosophes qui pensent qu'on peut reconstruire ce monde après la Deuxième Guerre mondiale dans un niveau système plus pacifique, plus intelligent, plus culturel. Ça, c'est pourquoi j'étais au UNESCO quelquefois à Paris. Ça, c'est mon espoir. Et ça, c'est le but de ce petit club de philosophie. C'est de trouver un autre chemin que la mort entre les géants de pouvoir. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be focusing on. So now we're going to play the philosophy game. We'll choose our gods carefully, have a shuffle, and we're going to ask what these different gods can say about this tragedy of the world situation we're in, and we'll learn from them.
Helios.
Helios, okay, Helios, merci. Right. We had him last week. On ne veut pas répéter, il était là la dernière semaine.
Exactly.
Although he's relevant still.
Eros, Queen of Water.
We had her recently, we won't have that one.
Sorry.
We're trying to have new gods each week.
Yeah.
Not easy. It's becoming harder and harder.
Three of air takes.
Well, we've had him, but we'll have him again because I like this one. He doesn't get out to play very often, and hardly anyone's ever heard of him. So we'll come back to him in a minute.
Are you sure we had him recently?
We have had him, yeah. Okay. I can't remember exactly when. Right. So this is extremely exciting. Let me line up the textbooks here. Put my Quran on the side. So the first one we have here is Helios, who is the sun god. He's also called Shamash by the Semitic peoples, and he's a very important deity. Obviously, the sun. We all love the sun, don't we? If we've got any sense. And he counts in the Tarot of the Gods as a 4 of fire. Because what I've done with the Tarot of the Gods is I've divided them into 4 suits: earth, air, water, and fire. And the fire suit includes the main fire deities of humanity, of which the solar gods are very important. And this is the solar god, 462. So, I think the sun is a symbol of power and light for humanity. I mean, we wouldn't literally exist without the sun as human beings. It creates, through the photosynthesis, the plants can extract sun's rays, which makes the plant and the tree. And then as we come and eat the fruit or the grain or whatever it is, we're literally digesting solar energy. It's the entire food cycle for humanity, for all the animals. Without the sun, there's no life possible. All of us are just solar energy converted into physical form vehicles as moving about creatures, right? But the sun energy, the solar energy, is the source of that, which is very interesting. And science now knows a lot about how that photosynthesis cycle works. A friend of mine was trying to make a film capturing the moment at which the solar energy is absorbed inside the plant cells. It's really interesting. I don't think yet it's been done properly. I've never seen even on YouTube. I challenge anyone to make a movie about that, a documentary, because that is the secret of life. How the photon gets into the plant, that's another whole story, which is incredible, which science has also worked out. It's happening in the very heart of the sun, which is, millions of miles away, 93 million miles away, and it's caused when two hydrogen atoms fuse into helium. They create a new atom, helium, and then there's a particle's energy is released in the form of photons, which then, and this is the bit that I find mind-boggling, it takes up to 100,000 years for the photons created in the middle of the sun to then reach the surface of the sun. Because inside the sun there's so many hot currents, plasma it's called, it's a state of matter called plasma, that they're swirling around, and these photons take 100,000 years to reach the surface. So, like we human beings have only, advanced hominids who can have philosophy clubs, we've only been around on this planet about 100,000 years, maybe 2 at max, but then you're scraping the barrel, you're going back to early Neanderthal types. Their philosophy clubs are mostly telepathic, I suspect. Whereas they didn't really have language in the way that we do, Homo sapiens. So think about it, like we human beings have been around 100,000 years, and that's the time it took for one light ray to reach the surface of the sun. Then it escapes from the sun, gravitational pull, and eventually it then comes to Earth in something like 6 minutes. It takes 100,000 years to get to the surface of the sun. It takes 6 minutes to reach the Earth. I mean, think of the stories it could tell. If a photon was writing its Bible stories, like I struggled with that plasma, I fought that current, I had to do that for 10,000 years, I got blocked by this, finally I made it to the edge. And then I had this amazing journey through space, travelling through this beautiful, dark blue amazingness. And then after 6 minutes, I found an oak tree. And it was amazing. I found this leaf and I squelched into it. And then I was absorbed and I became one with the oak tree. And I'm really happy being an oak tree now. That would be the Bible of the photon, if you want, its story, which I think is an awesome story. I think we should celebrate life. We should celebrate the sun for giving us food and light and warmth and all that. And why are some people trashing this planet, with their own ignorance and stupidity? So from time to time, great civilizations have tried to say, let's make solar worship the central thing about, existence. So the Druids, back in the old days, Stonehenge and Avebury, we made, the worship of the sun was very important. So you watch it coming up, and you celebrate the equinoxes and the solstices when it's the nearest, and during the summer solstice, it's very important, the longest day, and then the winter one when it's the shortest day. So you would clock the cycles of the heavens, and you would be mindful of the sun, because they thought the sun was somehow a conscious being. The sun is an intelligence way beyond what we are capable of understanding. But there's a solar logos, which is a phrase Alice Bailey uses, at the core of the sun. It's like a divine intelligence. We'd have to use that word. It's like a god. Well, I don't see what's wrong with that as a working hypothesis. It's quite a powerful and important God. We've seen how it creates this magic called life. And therefore, what's wrong with having temples to it and celebrating it? The Greek deity Helios was thought of as driving a chariot for Apollo, who's the other aspect of the sun god. And Apollo is another manifestation of the solar deity, as was Helios. And one of the beautiful things about the ancients is they didn't have a sort of rivalry or competition between different gods. The same reality, the sun, can have many different forms. And in in the Semitic tradition, Shamash was the name. And Shamash has his own legends, which I'll try and relate a couple of. Alors, en français, j'ai expliqué que cet dieu, Helios, j'ai donné une explication scientifique, qu'est-ce que c'est les détails au centre du Soleil, où les photons arrivent. Et ils traversent l'intérieur du Soleil. Ça dure une centaine des millions d'années. C'est incroyable le temps. Et après, il arrive sur la Terre, il entre dans les plantes. Et ça, c'est le commencement du vie. Alors, ça, c'est un grand mystère. C'est quelque chose d'incroyable. Et les anciens ont pensé qu'il y a une intelligence au derrière tout cela. C'est pas quelque chose qu'on peut expliquer seulement scientifiquement. Je suppose les scientifiques de l'université de Cambridge, les matérialistes, ils pensent que ça c'est tout un hasard. Le soleil, les fissions, c'est tout par hasard. Et la vie aussi, c'est un accident. Parce que le soleil, il n'y a pas d'explication pour moi. Mais je suis avec les anciens qui disent qu'il y a une intelligence divine au derrière tout cela. Et c'est comme les feux. C'est nécessaire de prendre le feu au centre du système solaire. Alors, so Shamash, the ancient Semitic name, was used in Mesopotamian culture. So in Babylon, Sumeria, in what is now Iraq and southern Turkey. The Sumerians believed that he also rode through the heavens. They called him Utu. And he was the god who's watching everything and then giving a judgment. So this old Utu is watching what's going on in Gaza. He will make a judgment. And he's watching, the stupidity and folly of Hamas in provoking it all. The stupidity of the overreaction of Netanyahu in committing war crimes in response. I mean, it's madness. It's very bad if you're trying to help Israel with PR because it has the opposite effect. Lots of nations around the world are now severing relations with Israel. They're appalled at this massacre of women and children, and so they're recalling ambassadors. And Shamash isn't happy about any of this stuff. So I think we all ought to know more about Sumerian and ancient Babylonian and Semitic culture in the Middle East. It's really interesting. Archaeologists have discovered lots of details that I've always tried to teach when I've been head of philosophy and religious studies in schools and in my courses at university. But most people don't get taught this stuff, but it's really interesting, in my opinion. Okay, so I think the meaning of this card for our conflict is to see it all from a bigger picture. If we are truly pious or have reverence in our souls, I mean, supposedly most people, or a lot of people in Israel, are there because they have a spiritual faith of some kind. They believe in the divine intelligence. They have different God names. They call God Elohim in the Bible. They call God Yahweh in much of the Bible. And then they have in the Kabbalah, they have the 10 Sephiroth, which each have a name. So there's some unbelievably complicated and profound and deep thinkers in Israel. I've met some of them, theologians of sort of marrying Judaism with science. So there'll be Kabbalists explaining the sun in Kabbalistic terms, right? But it seems to me the government's fallen into the hands of very simplistic religious thinkers who think only in terms of Israel's right, Islam's wrong. God's on our side, we can then kill the other people. And there's no respect for Palestinians who are both Christian and Muslim. There's no respect. I mean, what's being done to them is complete humiliation and disrespect, to put it mildly. And it has been going on for decades. It's also going on in the West Bank, so-called, which is supposed to be part of the Palestinian state. The people are doing this for theological reasons, because they have a complete ignorance of other faiths and no respect for them, which I find disgraceful and appalling. And if I want, feel free to invite me to Jerusalem to give some lectures there. We can play the game of the gods. I'm happy to invite people from all sides and come and resolve this at the level of divine intelligence. When I was in Jerusalem, I went to the gate in the eastern edge of the Temple Mount, which is blocked up, and it's there because it stands for where the sun comes up, the Orient. And in ancient Hebrew and Semitic culture, the sunrise is the place of most importance. So, and the legend says that at a certain time in history, the Messiah is going to come in through that golden gate. It's called golden because it's in the sun's rays. And then everyone will be happy. We'll all win. Win-win. All the wars will stop. The Messiah will bring peace. So I went there and I looked at it and I saw it was locked. It's been blocked up since the Ottoman Sultan did this in 1600 and something. And I said to my friends in Israel and Palestine, I said, why don't we reopen it? Like, we've been waiting for this Messiah for 400 years. I don't know where he's gone or she. Why don't we just get on with it and open it anyway? And we could have a procession of all the world's religious leaders coming in through that gate one sunrise. Like, symbolically, Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, Baha'is, you name it, and Druids too. I'll come in at the very last as a Druid. And we can get on with that, like giving history a happy ending, So anyway, all my friends said, brilliant idea, let's do it. But the crew that are in charge of Israeli government policy and Hamas policy seem to have not been listening to my talks. They've been listening to someone else who's talking about revenge, death. They're the guys that want to keep the door shut because they want only their own version of history to prevail. Whereas what I'm saying is we can rewrite the narrative where every narrative can be synthesized and reconciled. That's our job as philosophers. When you have conflict, you have to make a story that they can all win with. Alors, j'ai expliqué ça, c'est un peu compliqué, mais je suis un Hegelien philosophiquement, et on prend les hasards de l'histoire. On doit faire une synthèse entre eux, les combats de l'histoire. Il y a trop d'écorts sur la terre entre les nations, les religions, les races, et aux perspectives du soleil, ils sont tous les mêmes. Nous sommes tous les enfants du grand soleil. Donc, la guerre, c'est stupide. C'est pour les enfants. Quand j'étais petit, je jouais avec les soldats. Alors, et puis après, je suis un peu plus âgé. J'arrête de faire ça. C'est bon pour un petit jeu, mais c'est pas bon quand les enfants et les femmes sont détruits. Eh bien, ça c'est le Helios. Je l'aime beaucoup. Ok, et votre carte, le deuxième. Alors, okay, so this one is the three of air, who is called Tarches, who is Etruscan. And Etruscan religion is very interesting and very mysterious. What is Etruscan religion? Well, it was the religion of Tuscany, which was called Etruria, and it was a very sophisticated culture. It's thought that the people had come there from Anatolia, deep in history, like they were emigrants, and they came to bring us quite a sophisticated civilization. They were very good at metalwork, and they were good at agriculture, and they had great pottery. And if you go to the Vatican Museum in Rome, they have a whole floor dedicated to Etruscan objects. They loved to party, they had great wines, and in fact, when they were buried in their tombs, they would always put the married couple on the tomb having a party. like a sculpture of them. So that was like their idea of heaven. It's like, you know, a banquet with very good wine. I don't see what's wrong with that idea of heaven. It's quite a nice idea, especially if you've got your beloved consort with you. So, and Tarkes is unusual because he's a god who represents both agriculture, but also prophecy. And I'm going to tell this story. So once upon a time, the good people of Tuscany were out in the fields doing ploughing and getting on with life, when suddenly this god popped up, out of nowhere, literally, suddenly popped up. He was a young god, right? And they said, "Where did you come from?" "Well, I'm Tarkes. I come from heaven, of course. I've come to teach you all." "Ah, what are you going to teach us?" Well, he brought this scroll out, and he said, "Well, I'm going to teach you the mysteries of all the esoteric knowledge you can possibly seek or want in your lifetime. But you're going to have to be disciplined about learning it." It's called the Disciplina, Etruscan. And and he taught people basically how to become prophets, how to see behind events, how to interpret events for their meaning. So, as I was saying, as philosophers, we don't look at just the flashpoint of the moment. We try and look at the meaning of history and how it's unfolding. So imagine you've got a billiard ball and it's rolling down a slope. The prophet has to work out where it's come from, what rate of speed it's falling, where it is now, and then where's it going next? Where's the rate of angle? What's it going to do? That's what a higher mind does, and that's what Tarkes taught, was the skill to see the joined-upness of events. How do you do this? Well, you can do it by studying synchronicities, what Jung called synchronicities. And, you know, I'm writing a book about synchronicities. Of course, by definition, it's unfinishable. I've got about 300 examples from my own life that are in the book. At some point, I'll probably stop and publish the ones I've got so far. So you can see how time is tending. The other way you can do it is by just reading the signs in nature, looking at cloud shapes, patterns, because in some weird way that we can't possibly explain, the whole of nature seems to be, for Tarkes, it was a book waiting to be read. You can see it in the way birds fly, the shapes they make, the sounds they make. Because nature wants you to understand, wants you to be wise. So it's always sending you these signs. Astrologers do it by studying the patterns of the sky and working out their rhythms and the way they make shapes and keep changing. Anyway, all this stuff was taught by Tarkes as a young child, and they loved him. So they wrote it all down and made certain sacred books of his teachings, and these were kept in the Etruscan temples, the most sacred things. Now, what's interesting is that the alphabet that I write my books in, so-called English alphabet, is actually the Etruscan alphabet. It came down to us from the Latin alphabet. My mother was a Latin teacher as well as a French teacher, but it came originally from Etruscans who taught the Romans how to write. So we're writing in the Etruscan alphabet, whether we know it or not. In Rome, the Roman intellectuals like Cicero and many other Samuels, Varro is another name, they really respected the Etruscans because they knew they taught the Romans all the religion they had. And a lot of the words in Latin were from Etruscan. They taught them piety, which is an important concept in Roman religion. They taught them fidelity, fides, faith, which means trusting something even though you can't physically see it, like materialist demand. Oh, show it to me, prove me. No, a true savant will trust the invisible as well. There's a saying in Taoism that the sage pays attention to that which cannot be seen. You know, that's a very wise saying in the Taoist scriptures, because they were like the Etruscans. They saw that life is about discerning the invisible realm as well. And also eruditio was a Latin word for wisdom and enlightenment. It's come down, érudite en français, ça veut dire quelqu'un très sage. Erudite in English means a wise person. But it meant more than that in Roman Latin. It meant someone of enlightenment, someone truly enlightened, like dans le siècle des Lumières, Voltaire et les hommes comme ça, ils étaient érudites. And that means they were enlightened, and they were interested in the legends of the Etruscans. In the Enlightenment period, people used to go off and dig up stuff in Etruria because they discovered this ancient civilization, older than Rome. It was ancient when Rome was just young, you know. So anyway, lots of mysteries there, and scholars of religion like me are still studying. We haven't yet found Tahe's original book. If anyone knows where it is, please get in touch. We haven't found his autobiography, and also what happened to him at the end. Well, you know, he did a Christ. He disappeared into the sky in the heavens. He was the source of the Disciplina Etrusca, which is the Roman Latin name for what I'm talking about. And Claudius, who was probably one of the wise emperors of Rome, he wrote a whole book on the Etruscan mysteries because his wife was Etruscan. Because the Romans and the Etruscans ended up loving each other. But unfortunately that book's been lost to history. So if anyone knows where Claudius's copy of the Truscan Religion book is, please let me know. It's also not translated. The language of Etruscan isn't fully understood. It doesn't seem to be an Indo-European language. These people that came from Anatolia may have spoken a different kind of language. Again, it's a mystery. And in the Renaissance times of when great popes were sponsoring the Sistine Chapel and Michelangelo was getting, you know, his daily portion of wine to paint the ceiling and all that stuff. Also great scholars were about, and they began to say maybe the ancestors of the Etruscans were descendants of Noah, because Noah on the mountain in Turkey, right, was obviously a very ancient figure in the biblical story. And these scholars worked out that this biblical story must be sort of traces of universal history from that same time. And they figured Noah must have been an Aramaic-speaking chappie, which is the same language as Abraham. And maybe the people that brought the Truscan religion were sort of speaking a form of whatever Noah spoke. And some of them even wrote fanciful histories where Noah ends up sailing up the Tiber, you know, in ships. I mean, the Renaissance was a great time of the visionary imagination of historians was opening. There was a particular guy called Annius de Viterbo who wrote this kind of magical history of Italy, in which everyone gets a walk-on part, including Noah and Dionysus, and you know, and it all leads up to Christ, who's the reconciler of everything. So they stayed Catholics, but they had all this magical history behind them. And Tages was then first discovered by these people in the Renaissance, like rediscovered. So the Pope sent out people to go and gather, you know, what they could about the Etruscans. That's why there's a whole floor of the Vatican Museum devoted to them. And what I argue in my studies, in my Druid encyclopedia, obviously the Etruscans and the Druids were very close, because the Druid Celtic civilization was in northern Italy at this time. A lot of the cities of northern Italy were founded by Celts, Bologna and others. And the Etruscans were just there. So on the borderland, you would have had meetings between the wisest of the Etruscans and the wisest of the Druids. And they would have discussed things like oracles, prophecy,